Well, we all think we know about the Norman Conquest. William the Conqueror sailing across, landing at Hastings, fighting a great big battle and winning. So we know the mechanics of it. We know how. But do we know why? What brought William over here to conquer England? Well, you would think one motive might be pretty obvious: greed. William was a greedy man, certainly. When he died, and they wrote his obituary, they did mention the fact that he was avaricious. They used the word avarice. He was avaricious beyond average. So that much is most definitely true. A prince, a duke, a count, a king, whatever you like, in the 11th century had to develop his image if he was to stay in business, to attract a following, to protect his rule, to help his people feel secure. He had to do big things. He had to do noble things. He had to give justice. He had to be fair. He had to provide for the future. And he had to keep an eye out for the main chance to show his own people and everybody else that he was not to be trifled with. So William saw his chance with England. There's nothing unusual about that. Pretty well all medieval princes did pretty much the same. As an illustration, I'm sure you've heard of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was King of Macedonia in Greece. His entire career was taken up with conquering the Persian Empire, which was enormous. People often wondered why. Alexander had grown up in fear of the Persian Empire, and any Greek would want to get his own back on the Persian Empire, ideally, of course, remove it altogether. So the suggestion is that Alexander conquered the Persian Empire because it never occurred to him not to. That was the thing that he was there for. And in a similar way, William got the idea of conquering England because no alternative appeared particularly serious to him. And this was reinforced by the fact that in 1051, 15 years before the conquest, he'd visited England. And he'd met the king, Edward the Confessor. He was in fact distantly related to Edward the Confessor because his great-aunt, Emma of Normandy, was Edward the Confessor's mother. So there was a family relationship. And William claimed, when he got back to Normandy, not only that Edward had looked with favour upon him, treated him as a favoured and distinguished guest, and made a great fuss of him, but that he, Edward, would promise him, William, the crown when he, Edward, died. Now that's not so preposterous as it sounds, because Edward had no children, and he was not going to have any either because he had refused to have any kind of intimate relations with his wife. So the question of the succession was yawning wide open and getting wider with each successive year. So when the story got around that Edward had promised the crown to William, you can imagine the effect that this would have in Normandy, and in England for that matter. Great hope and excitement, possibly in Normandy, annoyance, indignation, even outrage in England. Who did this jumped-up bastard duke think he was, talking about inheriting the throne of England? But that was a motive, and a very, very powerful motive. That, plus the fact, as I said, he always had an eye to the main chance. Any medieval prince did. Any medieval prince had to carve a reputation for himself. He was only as successful as his last campaign. That was what medieval dukes did. Now, that does not mean that William the Conqueror leapt out of bed one morning, feeling good, and said, "Hooray, yippee! What a splendid morning this is in the Middle Ages. It's great to be living in the Middle Ages. I know, chaps. Let's go and conquer England today, shall we?" Clearly, it was not like that. It took a very long time. And one of the questions that needed to be asked was it realistic? It's all very well to have these wonderful ideas, but look at the size of England, look at the size of Normandy. Was it really going to work? Was it realistic? And if it wasn't, how on earth was he going to sell it to his barons, to his vassals, to his subtenants? You see, William just couldn't issue a set of call-up papers and expect all his Norman barons to come to the feudal host and bring all their soldiers with him. Because generally speaking, not only generally, always, there were laws about this. The rules said that a knight was bound to serve his overlord for 40 days a year, free. 40 days a year, free. But most of the regulations implied that service of 40 days a year only meant within the territory that he ruled, in other words, Normandy. It didn't cover going on wild adventures to places like England. And in any case, quite a large number of his Norman vassals thought it was crazy. They too had looked at the map of England and Normandy, and they reckoned Normandy would be on a hiding to nothing. Look at the population of England, look at the resources of England, look at the size of England's army, look at the reputation, look at their history. They had 500 years of history. The Normans had only been there 150 years. They didn't stand a chance. So too many Norman barons who had worked very hard all their lives to carve out their own particular set of property weren't going to risk it all on some crazy enterprise in England where they could lose the lot. So not all William's vassals were willing to follow him, not by a long chalk.